let me introduce Ellen Knight.
The origin of this program and its format began with a question that went out from the Society about new ideas for town day trolley tours. And I thought that women's history would be a good subject, but the tour would have to jump about all over town. So I an armchair tour of women's history instead. If there were a who's who of women in Winchester, it would have to include several women's groups, such as, but not limited to, the Fortnightly, born in the parlor of Sarah Nowell, devoted to mutual self-improvement and the achievement of social, intellectual, and benevolent purposes, the Equal Suffrage League, the Visiting Nurse Association, which not only supported visiting nurses, but also created a hospital in a rented house and then built Winchester Hospital. The Winton Club, the Inca Society, which began with a group of girls meeting in the hen house behind the Herrick House. But I would like to focus tonight on individual women who had a professional position or impact, whether in or outside the town. I suppose one of the first things that comes to mind in a discussion of women's progress is suffrage. Hundreds of Winchester women, including Rena Sanborn, campaigned for the right to vote. When they got it, women slowly began to fill municipal positions. But before the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, an 1874 change in the Massachusetts statutes allowed women to vote for and take seats on the local school committees. Well, just who were Winchester's first elected committee women? Anne Ware Windsor arrived in Winchester with her family in 1864. She created a private school for girls in an octagonal building behind their house, then located in the center. The school building is long gone, and the house went up to Vine Street. Windsor became the first president of the Fortnightly. The whole family was education-oriented. Daughter Mary Windsor founded and was principal of the Windsor School for Girls in Brookline, still going today, and named one of the top 10 prep schools in America by Forbes in 2010. Annie Windsor Allen, also an educator, founded the Roger Ascom School in White Plains, New York. Elizabeth Windsor Pearson co-founded the Nursery Training School in Boston. Now, Elizabeth Patton Pressey was a school teacher whose career ended after she married the widowed father of one of her students. Discrimination against married females in the United States was not terminated until 1964 with the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Pressey was still able to render service to education as a Sunday school superintendent, school committee member, and chairwoman of the Fortnightly's Education Committee. During her time, the club held programs on the industrial education of girls and is it expedient to open the higher institutions of learning to women? One who took part in that program on industrial education of girls was Mary Swift Lamson, whose house no longer exists, but was at the corner of Main and Lawson. In 1839, Lamson enrolled in the first class of the first state normal school in America, established in Lexington. After graduating, she taught at the Perkins Institute for the Blind. Among the more remarkable students of the school was Laura Dewey Bridgman, the first deaf and blind person to learn verbal language. For 3 years, Lamson was Bridgman's special instructor, helping to develop a finger talk. Later, Bridgman taught Anne Sullivan, who taught Helen Keller. It was Lamson who first told Keller that another deaf and blind girl had learned to speak, which sparked Keller's resolve to learn to talk. During her Winchester years, Lamson published a biography of Bridgman. When she married, Lamson's professional teaching career ended. However, she became a trustee of the State Industrial School for Girls in Lancaster and remained involved with education. After leaving Winchester for Cambridge, Lamson co-founded the Boston YWCA and served as its vice president. And do you know, some men criticized women's school committee members for wasting time on frivolous matters and being incapable of discussing school issues. But to be fair, some men thought they were an asset, though men got women off the board by cutting the board size in half, using the hiring of a superintendent as a pretext. There was another committee to which women were elected prior to 1920, the Board of Public Welfare, formerly the Overseers of the Poor, to which Lynthia Pierce and Emily Sims were elected in 1890. But charitable works were always viewed as proper and fitting activities for the ladies of the town. So no quibbling about women on this board, whose duties were eventually transferred to the Board of Selectmen. The first candidate for the Board of Selectmen after the 19th Amendment was Lawrence Woodside, shown in a very poor newspaper photo. She didn't win, though she did not come in last, rather sixth in a field of 8. However, she won election during the first meeting in 1929, founded and became the first president of the Winchester Women's Republican Club, was a member of the League of Women Voters, a member and director of the Winchester Taxpayers Association, and chair of the Fortnightly's Civics Committee. Furthermore, she was a professional woman, an authority on Norwegian folklore who taught at colleges, presented programs on lecture circuits, translated Scandinavian literature for publication, became president of the Boston Norwegian Women's Club, and an honorary fellow of the American Scandinavian Foundation. In fact, she arrived in Winchester in 1912 as something of a celebrity, the Star stating that she was a great favorite, quote, in almost every state of the Union. Further, she was a businesswoman who managed a farm in her native Iowa and occasionally acted as a manager on the lecture circuits. In Massachusetts, she was an authority on home gardens. During World War I, Governor McCall made her a member of the Massachusetts Food Administration. Maybe unsuccessful as a selectman's candidate, but as worthy as many a male one. One Winchester woman set a precedent for all women in government in the state. In 1911, an unprecedented event occurred. A woman, Mabel Stinson, was allowed to act as town clerk at a town meeting. She was so super qualified, applause broke out at the meeting. But she had to wait until 1920 to be offered the appointment as town clerk. And then it took an act of the legislature to make it legal. The bill was one of the shortest ever written, stating the clerk of the town of Winchester may be a woman. Women have also been involved in politics and government at higher levels. Outstanding in this regard are two of Massachusetts' first ladies, Ella Esther McCall and Jenny Volpe. McCall was the wife of a U.S. congressman for 20 years and was First Lady of the Commonwealth for 3 terms. Not included in Chapman's History of Winchester, and barely mentioned in her husband's biography. The McCalls settled in Winchester after marrying in 1881. Ella Esther McCall was not simply the woman who provided Samuel Walker McCall and their 5 children with a comfortable home. She was a public figure herself. She was interested in politics, kept on top of current issues, served on committees, and advanced civic involvement for women. After 16 of Sam McCall's years in Congress, a Globe writer commented that Mrs. McCall has been at least a half member of the National Congress. Much of her influence was behind the scenes. In Washington, McCall was an incorporator of the Congressional Club, meant to be a nonpartisan setting association among congressional spouses. Since it proved not to be always that nonpartisan, she resigned and became active with the National Civic Federation. She chaired a section of the Women's Welfare Department, organized to provide for study and discussion of questions of national import, seek solution, and in the crystallization of aid in the crystallization of enlightened public opinion, and when desirable, promote appropriate legislation. As First Lady of Massachusetts, McCall appeared as a guest speaker, delegations made frequent public appearances for benefits, and pitched in with war support workers. But McCall went beyond serving sandwiches and making celebrity appearances. She was president of the Women's Auxiliary of the Massachusetts Civil Service Reform Association. She was a vice president of the Fathers and Mothers Club, devoted to child welfare. She served on the Food Sanitation Committee of the Women's Municipal League of Boston's Department of Public Health. Jenny Volpe was First Lady of the Commonwealth during the 1960s. Unlike McCall, she was at first unhappy about her husband's being involved in politics. John Volpe told the Globe in 1987, quote, "When I first told my wife I wanted to run for governor, she cried for 2 days. She thought politics was too dirty for me, that I was too plain to survive." According to the Globe, a dozen years later, after Volpe had been elected Massachusetts governor 3 times and had been appointed the nation's first Secretary of Transportation, he was offered the chance to serve as U.S. ambassador to Italy. Her response could not have been more different. This time, John Volpe said, "When I first told my wife, she was overjoyed. She said, 'Except before they changed their minds.'" Volpe was a more private person than McCall. She was not, however, uninvolved. Volpe was a nurse at Winchester Hospital and continued to nurse for about 10 years. One of her interests as First Lady was improving the quality of the state's mental health facilities, every one of which she visited. Now, Winchester has been the home for many nurses, given the hospital used to run a nurse training school. Nurses were, of course, angels. But women doctors had more prejudice to overcome. The 2 earliest in Winchester were Adeline Church and Frederica Moore. When Chapman came to write about doctors in his History of Winchester, he wrote about Dr. Benjamin Church and added that his wife likewise was a physician, though she did not practice in Winchester. He noted that she was handsome and brilliant and taught medicine at the Boston University School of Medicine. He did not mention she did that for 16 years and for 12 years in a row went to Europe as a lecturing physician, and that she was an honorary member of the Board of Advisors for the Winchester Hospital. In the 4 pages that Chapman devoted to doctors, he left out Dr. Moore completely. Yet she was the first doctor on the board of directors of the Winchester Hospital, because the board was originally all women. And she played an important part in town health. A graduate of and lecturer at the BU Medical School, she was on the staff of the Massachusetts Homeopathic Hospital in the Children's Department. In 1913, she was appointed physician for the town of Winchester. This was a time when scarlet fever, measles, diphtheria, typhoid fever, and other communicable diseases were annual problems, and when the principles of good nutrition were not universally known, leading to a number of school children being undernourished and thus susceptible to contracting illnesses. Moore introduced health classes for elementary school children. With funding from The Fortnightly, she instituted the offering of supplementary milk to children in school. In 1915, Moore became the director of tuberculosis for the Board of Health, having entire charge of the clinic and doing house-to-house work for patients not under the direct care of another physician. In 1921, Moore resigned her Winchester post to accept a position as pediatrician with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. School physician Ralph Putnam expressed, quote, the greatest regret, unquote, at losing her services. How could Chapman have slighted this woman? Oh well. He slighted the Equal Suffrage League and the League of Women Voters. Another woman who should be honored for her devotion to the medical welfare of the town was Natalie Jewett, founder of the Winchester branch of the Red Cross, shown in a very poor passport photo. A magna cum laude graduate of Radcliffe, she received a certificate from the Simmons College of Social Work. For 10 years, like Pierce, she was a member of the Winchester Board of Public Welfare. Like Woodside, she was an original electee to town meeting. During World War I, she was active in the Red Cross, leaving town in 1919 to serve abroad with the American Committee for Devastated France. In 1921, she organized the Winchester chapter of the American Red Cross, with which she was active for 40 years. Now, nurses from Winchester served abroad during both wars. Their work was often heroic. Mary Louise Carpenter, for example, with 17 other Army nurses, landed on the Normandy beach on D-Day +7. Her kind of hospital was for the immediate treatment of those hurt too badly to be transported. So she saw some of the grimmest results of war. Her letters home reveal that it was a tough, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. The nurses sometimes worked under fire. She described the pounding of artillery barrages, the whistling of dropping bombs, the sound of a distinct air raid. Hers was a world of battle. After Normandy, Carpenter followed the invasion forces, working in field hospitals. Her medical team's usual location was about 5 miles from the front. 22 of the women on the World War II Roll of Honor have been identified as nurses with the Army or Navy, some known to have served in the various overseas theaters. While we're on the subject of military, I want to introduce Gertrude Meserve, an aviatrix. She began to learn to fly while a Winchester high school student in the 1930s. Soon after graduation, she was flying over Boston and Winchester and became, at 19, a full-fledged commercial pilot, the youngest in the nation. After gaining her licenses, Meserve went. Things just fell into my lap, she said. I was hired by the people who taught me how to fly. At age 22, she was a flight instructor for the civilian pilot training program in Boston. So they had a woman teaching the male students from MIT, Harvard, Northeastern, and Tufts. When the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron was created in 1942, she was invited to apply and was accepted. Their job was to fly planes from the manufacturer's military bases, thus freeing up male pilots for overseas assignments. Meserve flew many times the planes, delivering about 200 of them. She told one historian, flying for the WAFs was like flying on cloud 9, which is an understatement. There was a lot of skepticism about using women pilots. She told this historian, "The men did not want to use us," saying, "Oh, you girls can't fly." "It's easy," she said. "Just move the controls. Once you know how to fly, you can fly any plane." So let's move on to women in business. The first professional women listed in Winchester business directories, which began in 1854, were dressmakers, milliners, nurses, and music teachers, all acceptably feminine occupations. Then one of the milliners advertised small goods. The 1880 census and the 1881 Winchester directory gave her occupation as dry goods, revealing the first step I've seen of a local woman entering into the male-dominated mercantile professions. The milliner was Evelyn F. Whitney, aged 29 in 1874, a daughter of Joel Whitney, founder of the Whitney Machine Manufactory at Mill Pond. For about a decade, beginning around 1872 to 74, she ran her shop on Main Street in the Brown and Stanton building. But her career was cut short in 1883 when she died from pneumonia. A few other women ran thread and needle or little variety stores, sometimes in a room in their homes. But for business on a larger scale, we have to look at Fanny Bowser. She was one of 12 children born on a New Brunswick farm. 3 of her brothers moved to Massachusetts and ran successful dry goods stores. Fanny and her sister-in-law, Emma Bowser, established another one in Wakefield in 1885. In 1888, at age 45, Fanny struck out on her own, operating the F.J. Bowser Company in Winchester. She first located her store in Stone's Block at the corner of Main and Park Streets. Following a fire in 1892, which damaged the building, Fanny took her insurance money and moved her business to the White Block on Pleasant Street, now Mount Vernon. Of course, she had competition. Some very successful men ran dry goods stores. One was right across the street in the Lyceum building. Bowser simply appealed to a different clientele. Hers was both a dry goods and fancy goods store. She carried both women's and gentlemen's furnishing goods, but catered especially to women and children, stocking clothing and accessories, linens and draperies, fabric and patterns, a complete range of sewing supplies, plus toys and games, cards, calendars, and more. She ran her business successfully for 21 years. She sold it to her brother, Richard, who announced it would be operated along the same lines. So by keeping the goods that the people want and selling at right prices to merit the same generous patronage heretofore given Miss Bowser. The brother was pledging to keep the standards of the sister. Frances Jane Bowser had something men generally didn't admit women could have: a real head for business. Most women in the early 20th century who entered the business field did not own their own business. They were humble workers. Many found employment in local industries. Newspaper reports about a fire at a button factory in one of the Whitney buildings in 1871 noted that 25 girls had been temporarily thrown out of work. Women were employed at the Winchester Laundry. H. Wynne, which manufactured watch hands, and Cosgrove Skirt Factory, which made petticoats, employed girls almost exclusively in the early 20th century. In 1917, it was reported that the work of the watch hand girls, quote, requires a very delicate touch and is very monotonous. Very few girls under 18 years are employed, and the pay is not large as the work is unskilled. At that time, Cosgrove employed 15 and Wynne 86. Some women were able to train for particular jobs. In 1917, over at the Winchester Telephone Exchange, 34 girls who had graduated from the training school in Boston were employed. And I can readily believe that their pay was not large either. And speaking of low pay, during the Great Depression, the town was not unmindful of women in need. In 1933, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration asked all unemployed women to register. Projects such as knitting, sewing, and preserving were established to furnish employment. The garments they made went through the regular channels for distribution by town welfare among the townspeople. By February 1934, 45 women were employed. The instructors, a bookkeeper, and a timekeeper were paid 50 cents an hour. The others, 49 cents an hour. Decent pay was among a lot of changes which didn't come about until the late 20th century. It was 1961 when the school committee explained, "It has been and continues to be a fact that women teachers don't cost the town so much, and this was simply an economical fact of life that should be recognized." 2 years later, the Equal Pay Act came along. So let's change fields again. I'm not going to say much about sports. The Society has already had programs on the preeminent sportswomen of the past, the Owens. Among other things once considered inappropriate for girls, we can list sports. At the archives, we have some photographs of girls' basketball teams from before 1920, but no other girls' sport until after 1920. As of 1929, there were only 3 girls' varsity sports: basketball, field hockey, and tennis. Jumping ahead in time, in 1960, there were 4 intramural sports for high school girls, the previous 3 plus softball. Track and cross country were sports for boys. When Bobby Gibb, Winchester High School, class of 1960, applied to run the Boston Marathon, she received a curt reply that women were not physiologically able to run such distances and furthermore were not allowed to. But she disproved the first argument when she crashed the marathon in 1966. After 1972, when women were first allowed to run officially in the marathon, change was enabled in Massachusetts schools when Title IX was enacted and forbade excluding anyone for participation in an educational activity, including sports, on the basis of sex. Thereafter, Winchester High School track and cross country were no longer just for boys. Now let's look at some artistic professionals. Were there women architects? Yes. Elizabeth Coit, daughter of Robert, was one. She was a Radcliffe graduate who received her Bachelor of Architecture from MIT in 1919. Soon afterward, she relocated to New York City. But another woman designed at least 2 houses in Winchester, Eugenie Young, who told a Boston reporter that she was self-taught. Can one be a self-taught architect? She specialized in domestic architecture. Women, she stated, could be better architects for homes than men, since they understood what adds to the convenience and enjoyment of the home and the importance of details. When she was 45, her son went to war and her husband died. So she went to Paris to help with war relief and turned into a correspondent for the Boston Advertiser, sending letters full of graphic descriptions of under siege and news of young people she knew from the greater Boston area. When she returned, she left Winchester. Winchester was the home of many Winchester was the home of many women artists. Here we depart from the building tour and have a brief armchair gallery exhibit with examples of the work of Annie Nowell, Caroline Bowles Murphy, Adelaide Cole Chase, and Helen Pressey. I know a little something about all of these women, but the one I know best is Eva Dora Small Cowdery. She was from Maine and came down to Massachusetts due to another old tradition, which was that if a grown man in his own domicile was not married, a single sister was obliged to be his housekeeper. In 1871, Sylvanus Small settled on Washington Street after his wife Sarah died in 1870, leaving him with 2 small children. Sylvanus looked to his sisters to help with the household. Esther Small came first, but was not needed in that capacity once Sylvanus remarried in March of 1874. Then she herself got married. After his second marriage ended, Sister Eva joined Sylvanus. The 1880 census gives her occupation not as artist, not student, but simply keeping house. She emerged as an exhibiting artist soon after 1880, the years that she married fellow artist Charles Herbert Cowdery in a double wedding ceremony with Sylvanus and his third bride. In Winchester, Eva Cowdery found patrons among prominent families. For example, doing oil portraits for the Skillings and Pond families. She did charcoal portraits of Dr. Frederick Windsor and the Reverend Richard Metcalf for the Unitarian Church, a portrait of Admiral Henry Knox Thatcher for the local post of the Grand Army of the Republic, which is now owned by the Society. Cowdery also drew charcoal portraits for the Winchester Savings Bank of the second and third presidents. Cowdery was included in local art exhibits. She also exhibited in Boston, and with her reputation growing, she took a studio in Boston, as did her husband, and the couple took up residence there. Afterward, her work was included in at least 2 loan exhibitions of local artists in Winchester. 95, when 2 prize-winning portraits were included, and another at the Calumet Club in 1904. Cowdery also studied in Europe and New York City, to which the Cowderys moved in 1906. They moved to New York in 1908. She enjoyed success, particularly as a portraitist, although she also painted still lifes and genre scenes, and roses as wedding presents. After her husband died in 1919, Cowdery moved back to Boston for about 10 years and then settled in with her sister Esther back in Winchester. In 1931, Herman Dudley Murphy and Garrett Benneker were assisting the trustees of the Winchester Public Library in acquiring works by local artists for a permanent collection in the new library building. At first, there was no mention of women artists. Already owned was a portrait of library patron David Billings in 1889 by Esther Mabry Walden. Soon, a resident suggested obtaining a picture by Foxcroft Cole's daughter Adelaide, but that did not happen. The only new acquisition by a woman artist came when Cowdery promised them a portrait, duly delivered that September and pronounced beautiful by the chairman of the library trustees. Later, her niece gave the library 2 more Cowdery paintings. But over time, Cowdery's reputation dimmed. The library trustees sold the first painting in the 1960s, and the other 2 paintings, reportedly put in a safe place, were lost. I think that this is the one they sold before and after restoration. If so, what a shame that it's not still in our library. If we look also at the Winchester Handicrafts Society, we can find more women or craftswomen, but time does not permit. Winchester women were also involved in theater and film, including Jane Windsor Gale, founder of Boston's Toy Theater; Karlene Samoiloff, the only American to tour with Stanislavski's Moscow Theater and founder of a Winchester Children's Theater; actress Bette Davis, who lived in Winchester from age 3 or 4 to about age 11, during which time she had her tonsils out at Winchester Hospital. Davis was born in 1908 in Lowell. Her family moved to Winchester in 1911 or 12. She would walk from her Cambridge Street home down to the Wyman School on Church Street, where she went to kindergarten and grade school until 1918, when the family moved to Hancock Street. Then they moved away, and she went to Newton. Davis's recorded memories of Winchester, memories of her childhood. She remembered biting cold white days when Bobby and I would slide down the hill behind the house on our backsides without our sleds. The swing near the kitchen, which I strained to help me touch the sky. The flowers in the woods nearby, and our vegetable garden in the summer. The first Cadillac Daddy brought home. The family outings on Sundays. I was always happiest when I was outdoors and wandering through the woods, which are gone now. In 1928, Bette Davis went on stage with the Provincetown Players, and 2 years later was in Hollywood. Twice later, Davis is known to have had contact with Winchester. In 1937, when the Winchester Theater opened, she sent a congratulatory telegram. In November 1943, she participated in a special radio broadcast from Winchester, the climax to a drive to aid Greater Boston Community Fund agencies. The broadcast was given from the stage of Town Hall. Several Winchester groups contributed to the show. Davis, however, spoke from her studio in Hollywood. One actress who starred on the stage of Winchester High School before turning professional was Priscilla Morrill, class of 1945, president of the Dramatic Society in her senior year. Morrill made her stage debut with the Brattle Theater Company in Cambridge and later appeared on Broadway. Morrill had guest roles on dozens of television shows from the 1960s through the 1990s, shows such as Hallmark Hall of Fame, Barnaby Jones, Maude, All in the Family, Mork and Mindy, Family Ties, Newhart, Coach, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show, on which she appeared as Lou Grant's wife. Now, turning to musicians, there have been many. And have women musicians had difficulties also? Oh, yes. Until the last decades of the 19th century, it was considered unsuitable, unladylike, and even ridiculous for a woman in this country to play a violin or a cello in public. And it was worse that she should play a wind instrument which distorted the face. Playing the piano or harp or the guitar to accompany singing in the parlor might be a genteel accomplishment, but professional concert performances were something else. The acceptance of women musicians on a par with men was gradual and often arduous. Reviewers sometimes expressed surprise at how well women played, but if they were complimentary about their skill, critics still expected women instrumentalists to display femininity in their manner and recommended they confine their repertoire to light music. And Mozart, about which one reviewer said, "The exquisite grace and virginal purity of this music is in beautiful harmony with all that one reverences in a young woman's nature." But women repeatedly demonstrated that they could do anything their male counterparts could. Still, if they were competent, the male ensembles didn't want them taking their jobs away. The first woman to win a Boston Symphony Orchestra string section did not do so until 1957. Yet it was in ensemble work that career musicians could best earn a living. In the days before radios and recordings, musicians were in demand to provide entertainments at receptions, dances, colleges, hotels, club dinners, parks, and other venues. It could be a difficult life, not only with the perpetual need to secure work, but also with a lot of travel. But women did it, often by banding together, independent of the established male organizations. Winchester's Laura Tolman was one of Winchester's earliest and greatest successes. She played in 2 of Boston's lady orchestras. She herself created a succession of 3 trios, the Svensson Trio, the Brahms Trio, and Tolmanina, being one bestowed upon her by her friend, the internationally renowned opera singer Eduard Duretska. She also played as a soloist, and by 1924, with a, quote, reputation as an artist of the highest class, she was credited with 800 concerts. Helen Wynne of the Wynne Watch-Hand family also played in a lady orchestra and string quartet, formed her own trio. After her second marriage, she returned to Winchester and began a music club for home concerts. Like other women musicians, she often found engagements with the many women's clubs in surrounding communities, which annually presented a variety of musical programs. What was true of professional ensembles was not necessarily true of amateur ones. The Winchester Orchestral Society and the Winchester Orchestra combined men and women. The Laundry had an orchestra? Yes, an activity of its mutual benefit association. They played at concerts in and out of Winchester. They played on the radio. Only 2 women are shown here, but it shows that they were allowed. Other Winchester women who were professional musicians include Marguerite Francesca Grebe, Mrs. Edwin Ginn, and sisters, for whom Ginn added a great music hall onto his home. In 1909, a Winchester Star reporter wrote, "Oh yes, one would say the Ginn place is representative of artistic Winchester." Well, I don't know how that applied when the music room was added. I don't think anyone else had a music room with a parquet floor, paneled in walnut, including an 8x10 Carrara marble fireplace, and housing a 30x30 Aeolian organ, and furnished with 2 pianos, tapestries by Gobelin, and murals by Ettore Casser. Well, this room we're in now was the Sanborns' music room. Now for writers. Winchester has been home to fiction and nonfiction writers and journalists. Elizabeth Shepley Sargent was born in Winchester, lived here about a dozen years, and was educated at Mary Windsor School in Boston. She became a journalist and writer. During World War I, she went to the Western Front as a correspondent for the New Republic and was among those whom Eugenia Young reported on while in Paris. I do not find that professional authors have been as numerous or as recognized as artists and musicians, but I may be wrong, as I have not delved deeply into this subject. And I confess that I have not researched women in science other than medicine. One woman who taught science came to my attention recently, Elizabeth Goodwin Redfern Dennett. She was included in a Women's Who's Who, published for 1914-15. Several Winchester residents were included, 3 of the Windsors, Mary Lansom's daughter, Kate Lansom, who as Foreign Secretary for a Women's Board of Missions in 1911 made a round-the-world journey visiting missions, including Ceylon, India, and Japan. Rather adventurous for a young lady in 1911. Redfern's story also sounds adventurous. She graduated from Smith College in 1897, and for 3 years she taught zoology, botany, and Latin at the American College for Girls in Istanbul. According to a granddaughter, she embraced Reverend Julius Seeley's sermons about how only educated women could help, quote, women of the heathen world, women whose minds, he said, had been starved so long their brains resembled crippled feet. Redfern taught future nurses. Again, according to the granddaughter, her parents called her home after a fellow teacher eloped with an Arab prince and converted to Islam. Back home, she gave lectures on Turkey, her audiences including the Fortnightly, and a few years later, she married a nice Winchester doctor. She joined the Equal Suffrage League, and in 1919, following a war which took the life of her stepson, was quoted by a Boston paper saying, "We cannot make the world safe for democracy until universal opportunity is vouchsafed to women." Her story shows that higher education in many fields was opening up for women at the end of the 19th century, and increasingly giving women the ability to be useful in quite a variety of ways. Now, I know I've left out women who might have been mentioned, and there may be plenty of others I am unaware of. But I hope the ones I've chosen have been illustrative of the challenges faced by and the accomplishments made by women who lived in Winchester. The end.